Hey Kailash.
Hi Rahul.
So I was just thinking over all the things. We spoke about WWE and how nobody knows, but it's one of the most recognizable brands in India. We talked about Kabaddi, which turned out to be the second most watched sport in India.
Yep.
We talked about running, but we have more than 1 lakh Indians participating in Indian marathons. We talked about badminton, and we have millions of disappointed fans because we are not getting a medal in the Olympics. But Kailash, are all sports such successes in India?
I don't think so. I think baseball never made it. American football never made it. I don't know. What do you have in mind?
Well, can you think of something which happened in India and then just completely disappeared?
One thing was that whole bringing F1 to India.
Yeah.
It was just about 3 years that we were hyped up about F1. I really cannot believe that actually happened.
So I was thinking today we can talk about, what happens when a business fails. And we'll talk about the most spectacular failure in Indian sports, which was Formula 1 in India.
It's lights out and away we go.
Can you connect Anna Hazare,
Okay.
the Gandhian who started a big protest in Jantar Mantar,
Yep.
Greg Norman, who is, for those who follow golf, is considered to be one of the biggest golf stars, but now is considered to be the best designer of golf courses.
Okay.
The band Metallica,
All right.
Akhilesh Yadav,
Wow.
and a common street mongrel.
Wow. No, there's no way. This looks like New York Times connections. I have no clue what connects them.
Okay, so I'm glad I pulled you in Kailash because today we're going to get to how all of these are connected around the Gautam Buddh Formula 1 circuit in India.
Wow. So we are going to connect Akhilesh Yadav to James Hetfield to a mongrel.
To Greg Norman.
Anna Hazare. Okay, let's start.
Economies of Khel. Episode 5.
Short Circuit, India's F1 story.
So Formula 1's economics is very connected to the different cities they're going to. I think if you look at Formula 1's expansion last 20 years, you've had all these new places. So you have Abu Dhabi,
Under the lights here in Abu Dhabi, it's lights out.
you have Bahrain, you have a bunch of American tracks which was never there before. So the
Miami.
Miami,
And the Miami Grand Prix is underway.
and the latest one is Las Vegas.
From Las Vegas, this is
There was an attempt in India, which we'll come back to later about why it failed. There's one in China.
the race in Shanghai begins in 5 lights time.
So Africa is the only continent which has had no races. So half the races are outside Europe, which is the stronghold. Just think of it this way. There is almost, aside from Honda, there's no other team which is non-European.
Yeah.
There's almost no famous non-European driver that you can think about.
Yep.
And yet half the circuits are outside Europe. So for me, that's a very big part of the economics. Like where did the money start coming in? You start tapping into these new giant fan bases. How did Formula 1 become so popular or such an important sport in India in such a short time? Do you have any memories of what did we associate with Formula 1 back then?
I think we have to start with Vijay Mallya.
Yes, I'm afraid I have to be held responsible.
Being from Bangalore, Mallya was always there in the papers. He was in the media spotlight.
For right and wrong reasons.
Yeah, for right and wrong. Mostly at that point, he was celebrated because he was also like the poster boy of the Indian neoliberal times, right? Here was a guy who comes from a family which was already in business. He had all the characteristics of the flamboyant rich guy. He was into racing, right? He had raced for a while. He wanted to kind of bring the Western sporting culture and the general culture into India. And we saw his attempt in IPL, and that was a huge success. And I think F1 was kind of like a natural movement. And I think Vijay Mallya was, and everybody kind of knew that he was pitching to get F1 into India. But what I don't know is how did he finally manage, and then how did we end up with the track in Noida? That is what I am interested in.
So this is actually a fairly long story and I had to do some investigative journalism. So I think there are two parts to this, right? So first is like Vijay Mallya is fairly ahead of its time because he's understood that sports, entertainment, his brand of Kingfisher, all of them work well together, right? And his famous tagline was King of Good Times. So he figured that, you can mix all of this up.
Oh yes, he embraced that. I mean, we saw it in his parties, calendars, everything.
Yeah.
He embraced that, yeah.
And in 2007, he did something very unusual, Vijay Mallya brought together a group of investors to buy a Formula One team called Spycar in 2007. One of the other important investors that Vijay Mallya brings is Subrata Roy, who is head of this upcoming finance company called Sahara India. And
wait, so we are talking about all the people who have their own Netflix documentaries now.
Yes, so you're catching on, Kailash, to where we are going to move forward. But let's not jump ahead of the story. So just like Vijay Mallya, Sahara has also been branding sports and they've been famous for branding cricket. So they're both interested in getting into this, and also both of them are starting to have private airlines. So there's some connection there, and both of them are the main investors. And parallelly, in 2007, they built the Force India team. Parallelly, they both started investing in IPL. So they're both fairly serious in this market of businessmen who are entering the sports business industry. Right. The tricky question now is that, okay, Vijay Mallya wants to bring Formula One, he has a car, but why does the Indian government want to bring Formula One? Because, we have to remember two things. One is that India has almost no history of car racing. It's very little. And there's one Indian racer, Narayan Karthikeyan, who is the only Indian to have made it to a Formula One circuit. India does not have any sort of viewership of Formula One or car racing. There is no local or grassroots level talents which can be encouraged. There is also not clear how you can make money of this. Right? So the question is, how did a Formula One track come to India? And for this, I think you have to take one step back about another development that's happening. Okay. Most people think of India as liberalizing in 1990s. Yep. But if you look back at 1990, most companies did not, or especially foreign companies, did not come into India because India was still a very hard place to do business. There was a lot of corruption, there was a lot of bureaucratic red tape. You have to go past the central government, the state government, the local MNC. Within India, different businesses had found ways of blocking others, so it was not conducive for investment and foreign investment. The change happens in 2004 when a new Congress coalition government comes to power called UPA. They introduced a policy called the Special Economic Zone Act in 2005. And most people might remember it because there were two big protests against this. The most famous was that the Tatas tried to open a factory for car plant in Singur. And there was a huge protest against it. What's important for us is that this Special Economic Zone Act allowed a certain change which wasn't possible before. Which is that in the past, if you had to develop something, the government had to procure that land. Okay. And then they had to develop that land. And the government was procuring the land through legal channels and developing the land by giving it to developers. The problem in India has always been that most government developers were not either skilled to handle big scale or it was too corrupt. So someone take on a project the size of Formula One, it didn't exist acumen. So the Special Economic Zone Act allowed this special committee to be made, which doesn't have to be government anymore. Okay. So now, under this act, you can make a committee which is developing a certain project, which will have both state bureaucrats, government officials, and businessmen. Okay, so together. Was this like a public-private partnership? Exactly. Kind of so this was a roadmap for a public-private partnership. Right. And everyone was very necessary because when you do something of such large scale, procuring the land has very different challenges. Once you procure the land, developing it has very different challenges. Right. And then once you develop it, selling it has different challenges. True. So it's very hard to bring all these people together. So the Special Economic Zone Act allowed a special government body to be made. Right. So from 2005, our arms race starts in all the big cities in India, which is the first market for large-scale development. And for those of you who grew up in the cities, you'll have memories that in Delhi, I remember like Gurgaon started developing and all these malls started coming up. In Hyderabad, Gachibowli, Cyberabad, all these places developed. In Bangalore, Electronic City starts develop. In Bombay, you see the Bombay Expressway, Navi Bombay. And how does it develop? The government earmarks a certain land, buys it from the public. This development committee then plans what will be made and they build it and then they sell it. Right. Every city started looking for poster boys for this project. Okay. And this is the interesting story where Formula One comes in. So you remember how I mentioned that Vijay Mallya 2007 bought a Formula One team. Yep. And so that kind of helps him start going around and says that, I can bring Formula One to India. And we know Formula One is trying to expand in the world market. So there's some matching of interests. So Vijay Mallya is one of a few people who's trying to sort of negotiate with the government of India to convince them that there is value in bringing Formula One to India, both as projects which is going to be poster boys for this new Special Economic Zone, but also we were speaking a little before about how a Formula One track brings a lot of international tourism, businesses. sources of revenue to a city.
So Malia was like a broker between F1 and the Indian government to ensure the race coming along.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's a lovely analogy.
Okay. So then what happens?
So then we have a bidding war. And suddenly, if you go back to newspapers at that time, everybody wants a piece of Formula 1. So the first city to show interest was Bangalore, which is Vijay Mallya's own city. And Bangalore is known for having a lot of land available around the airport.
Yes. And the best cricket club. Isala Kapnam there.
Then the next person to make a bid is Bombay.
Okay.
And Bombay is pretty serious. So there's actually talks of having it Bombay, and there are talks of having a street circuit like Monte Carlo in Bombay.
Oh. Okay.
And then suddenly, by 2008, Hyderabad jumps in because there's a new development in Shamshabad in Hyderabad.
Right.
And they want to develop the airport and develop this Formula 1 track. And none of it is getting confirmed. But finally, the actor who manages to get their hands on this contract is a company which is now very well known, which is JP Infrastructure.
Okay.
Now, for developing this, JP Infrastructure gets a parcel of land, quite big actually. It was like several thousand acres of land.
So, I mean,
which they
obviously, if they are planning to build like a F1 track, they better need that much. But they were able to get that.
Yeah, so they were allocated by the government, this land, which of course they had to buy, and then they could redevelop it and sell it.
All right.
So that was JP's interest in it.
Okay.
So JP Infrastructure's big plan for how do you make a real estate really jump up in value, right? You've got this 1,000 to 2,000 acres. It's on Yamuna Expressway. But they thought that why don't we build into an international sports hub?
Okay.
Right? Where the pitch was that we'll make a sports city next to our residential apartments, which will have events from all around the world. You'll have tourists and businesses and hotels and malls coming up. And so the people who own the house there, their real estate value will be really high.
Oh, yeah. And you can watch sports from your balcony.
Right? So this is the point where their interests start matching Formula 1. And at that point, JP actually shows interest in developing the Formula 1 circuit in India. And what will later become the Gautam Buddh track is actually a piece of land which was part of JP's development land on the Yamuna Expressway, which was allocated to building the Formula 1 track.
Wow. All right. So now a construction company has entered. We have Vijay Mallya there and the track about to be built.
Correct.
Okay. Next, what happens?
So we'll fast forward a couple of years because it takes a long time to build anything.
All right.
So around the first race has been planned for 2011.
Okay.
And Formula 1 is fairly new in India. So of course JP and Formula 1, they're all trying to drum up interest in Formula 1. So they start building different events to popularize Formula 1. So the first Formula 1 is in October 2011. And they do two very exciting events to try and build our interest. So one is that they actually build a golf course.
Okay.
Which is designed by sort of world-renowned ex-golf player and now designer of golf courses, Greg Norman.
Okay, so wait, it's really weird that they're building a peaceful, very slow activity, which is not a sport, next to a extremely fast driving circuit.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
All right.
And so they have like Greg Norman comes to Delhi and he inaugurates his green and all these famous golfers from around the world come and participate. So it starts getting some traction. And it culminates in a rock concert by Metallica.
Yes.
And Metallica is going to come in beginning October and perform on the track. And then later in October, you'll have the Formula 1 race. But in 2011 itself, there are different reasons why this track starts getting bad publicity. So Metallica might have performed the next day, but at this point they say we refuse to perform. So it's another negative event.
Yeah.
The third very interesting negative event is 2 days before the race starts, a street dog, runs through the race track. And all the media picks up and they says that, what kind of safety do we have when a street dog can come on the race track? And finally when the race happens in Formula 1 India, it doesn't have as many people attending as you would think.
What was the capacity? I mean, how many people did they expect and how many turned up?
So in the first race itself, they are unable to fill up the whole stadium.
Okay, and so what was the capacity and how many people
came? So it had been reported that about 120,000 people can be accommodated in the venue.
Okay, and reports say about 95 showed up in the first season and then it was a gradual decline.
Yeah, so 95 first season, by the third season it almost halves to 45,000.
Oh wow.
And it's also been reported in the media that many of the people visiting were actually people brought by the sponsors to fill up the stands. So we don't have any substantial evidence for this.
So this was like an election rally?
Exactly, because it was important to make it seem like it was fairly busy. And if you want a decent ticket, then your starting price is somewhere around 25,000.
Oh my, yep.
So very few Indians actually can afford to go and see this Formula 1 race. So you are highly dependent on international travelers coming to filling the circuit.
Right. So on one side, the company put in a lot of money, but somehow the people didn't turn up.
Yeah.
So was that the final blow that stopped F1?
So there are two things that happened with stop
Okay.
F1. So officially Formula 1 stays for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, Bernie Ecclestone pulls out with being fairly vague about why he's left.
Okay.
And it almost, if you read it from outside, it looks like there was a negotiating tactic. But the thing that's reported in the media and we know about is that over time, many tax laws were used to make F1 pay up more taxes.
Okay.
And there are separate incidents. It wasn't all happened in one time. But in all different ways, when Formula 1 came, they expected to be supported by the India government and subsidized so that they can help develop the sport. And similarly, JP expected that they would be subsidized by the Indian government, so they've invested a lot into this track and they can re-earn the revenue.
Yep.
But actually, when it came to operations, different ways, they were actually, not only were they not being subsidized, many times they were actually being charged even more. And from, I think, Formula 1's perspective, they felt like what they were promised, the kind of encouragement wasn't coming. And they weren't sure if this is a partnership they want to continue with because there was no guarantee that it will be successful.
So this tax was applicable on pretty much everything, or was this like on specific things which F1
the
did?
biggest tax challenges were threefold. Formula 1 is a foreign company.
Okay.
When Formula 1 is held in different countries, those countries which host it give Formula 1 an amount of money as license fees, saying that we use the Formula 1 brand, so we are paying you revenue for this.
Right.
It was estimated that Formula 1 was owed about 36.5 millions as licensing fee.
Wow.
The Indian government decided to use a policy which is fairly common in India, that any foreign investment, when it takes back profit, a part of it has to be paid as tax.
Okay.
And it's a fairly high amount. It can range all the way from up to 30 to 40%. Depending on what kind of commodity you're producing.
Right.
So there was already a negotiation about how much tax you pay on this licensing fee. The second challenge happens is that how do you define Formula 1? So if Formula 1 is seen as a sport which is meant to development of youth, encourage the sport, have certain social benefits for the country, then it falls under a very different tax bracket.
Okay.
However, the Indian government wanted to push Formula 1 into the entertainment tax bracket.
Okay.
And just to give you context, all sports don't fall under it. So Commonwealth Games, for example, is not seen as entertainment.
Okay.
So it's taxed differently.
Something which improves the youth and something as of social
contributes
good.
Society.
Right.
So the tax rate became higher because it was seen as an entertainment good.
Okay. F1 fans, please don't get triggered. The Indian government also thought your sport was not a sport. Okay.
And then the final sort of nail in the coffin was, all the people who came as part of Formula 1, and each team has about 200, 250 employees. Wow. When they worked in India, the money they earned was counted as their income or salary. And so a professional tax had to be paid by every individual driver and staff of Formula 1.
Wow, that's tough.
That's tough, but actually how this plays out is a little different.
Okay.
So all this is happening in the back.
Okay.
But the big event that happens is, in 2012, a new chief minister comes in Uttar Pradesh, Akhilesh Yadav, who's from the Samajwadi Party.
Yep.
And he's very vocal in ensuring that these taxes are paid. And he starts giving media bites, saying that, Formula 1 is not paying these taxes and they have to pay. And it becomes a national issue. Yeah, other people are commenting that, wait, why is Formula 1 being given these subsidies? Formula 1 should pay these taxes. It's a rich man's sport, right?
Yes.
The headlines around it changes. And that could be part of the reason why Formula 1 left. Because they felt like, our brand is not getting traction in India. It's been seen as a rich people's sport. It's seen as a luxury sport. And people are questioning, should India be spending so much?
You know what is really interesting, Rahul? The fact that the government had a confusion whether it was sports or entertainment, we will get back to that. But research has shown, and a few people have written about this, where one of the reasons they see, right, apart from the fact that there was taxes, there was, a lot of problems with infrastructure, maybe, all those things aside, a huge problem which people saw was that F1 was not made for the Indian audience or the Indian consumer, right? So this was kind of like hangover of the Commonwealth Games. So Commonwealth Games
What do you mean by hangover of Commonwealth Games?
Okay, so this is what happened. So we all know the stories around Commonwealth Games. A lot of things happened, especially corruption, very bad infrastructure. Certainly a lot of people getting, into that kind of scam which was happening. So at this point of time, both JP, I think, and Vijay Mallya and all of them wanted to still show that India could host a international event. And for this reason, the money which was put was huge. JP put in a lot of money, and they brought in Hermann Tilke, who's one of the most famous racetrack designers. And he designed the Buddh International Circuit. So they wanted very specifically not to have any kind of connect of India. They wanted to show a very modern space.
And a very global.
Very global, very modern. So you had what they call the problem of globalization, right? Globalization is where you have something which is available across the globe, but there is some Indian touch. For example, McDonald's having some aloo tikki, right? Like that. That was missing with F1.
So for me, maybe the biggest thing which people don't connect with Formula 1, but I can find if you look at the newspaper, is in March 2011, Anna Hazare starts spearheading campaign against corruption in the central government. And he does it in Delhi because the UPA government is based in Delhi, and it's based around multiple charges of corruption against the UPA government. Initially this campaign fails, then he moves to Jantar Mantar, and it's a very highly covered event, right? And he initially threatens to go on a hunger strike, but then it's a sit-in and it goes on for more than a month. One interesting person makes his first public appearance at this time. Do you remember who that was?
Yes, let me guess. Kejriwal?
Yes. So Arvind Kejriwal at this point is a bureaucrat who's IIT alumni, and that's his claim to fame. And Arvind Kejriwal is found sitting on the dais next to Anna Hazare.
Yes.
Unconnected, but I think this is why they both get connected. In May 2011, there's a protest by farmers in a village in UP called Bhatta.
Okay.
And in itself, it wouldn't have any significance, but because UP is this is fairly close to Delhi, about 100-150 kilometers, the media pick up on this and they go and they cover this protest. And the protesters say that these private developers are buying our land and they're kind of forcing us to sell at a very cheap price. But we know that they sell it for a much higher price. And they kind of show statistics of how the price that they have to sell their land with is being sold at more than 10 times the price by the developers.
Oh, wow.
So they're doing a protest saying that we are being forced, our farmland has been taken and it's been taken by these private developers. And the media picks up on this as another incident of government corruption.
Ah, got it. Okay, so in general, F1 is also seen in the same line.
No, so this is the coincidence that this Bhatta village happens to be 25-minute drive or 30 kilometers from the Formula 1 rink. And it's part of the Yamuna Expressway land development. So Bhatta is one of several villages whose land was appropriated to A, create the Yamuna Expressway, but B, develop the land to be part of the modern business they're bringing there.
Oh, okay. So
it gets the connection between that and Formula 1 immediately happens because 2011 is the year Formula 1 is going to happen.
Yep. Right.
So this is May 2011 and the first race is October 2011.
My argument is India did not fail, right? With the first edition of F1, it was JP which put all the money. It was Vijay Mallya who had his investment. And remember, there was technically, except for the SCZ part, I don't think there was any government involvement in the general development of F1. So this was a private project taken up by a private company and made over public land which was taken or given, right? Now, the failure of it points to the people who are investing, right? That is how business is seen. If you have to be smart enough, they could have saved the track. But here, I think we have to put pretty much all the blame on, I won't say blame, all the decision making on JP, which might have led to whatever the failure was. I wouldn't want to blame India as a whole.
So that's a fair point, Kailash. I think one of the intuitions that should be brought in over here is that JP has to make a huge investment. Why would a business make a huge investment where there's no guarantee of profit? If they at least informally have certain confidence that they will be allowed to function and earn the investment.
Right.
And I think that's where the difference happens. So let me go back to my story because that might help us unpack this a bit more. In 2012, there's a new election in UP and Akhilesh Yadav is elected, who's from Samajwadi Party, which is the direct competitor of BSP. So the first thing that Akhilesh Yadav comes to power is he wants to ensure that the UP voters see him as the right person to be in charge.
Right.
And there is this protest, very highly publicized protests against land grabbing by the previous government going on. And also, the Yamuna Expressway is highly connected to Mayawati.
Yes.
So Akhilesh probably wants to distance himself away from something which seems like a very rich people. Yeah. And large part of UP's voting bank is farmers, agricultural lobby. So he has good reason to distance himself from. So even though he inaugurates, the Yamuna Expressway is inaugurated in August 2012.
Okay.
But in 2012 itself, he starts pushing these higher taxes on Formula 1.
Okay, so it was the state government taxes which hit harder.
Which hit harder.
All right.
And then a couple of more things happen which make it even harder for Formula 1. So you remember how we talked about how Arvind Kejriwal was part of Anna Hazare's dais
Yes.
and someone who was representing the fight against government corruption.
Yep.
He becomes Chief Minister of Delhi in 2013. But suddenly it seems for Formula One that the UP government is not supportive.
Okay.
The Delhi government is not supportive. How do we build over
Right.
here? And then in 2014, the BJP government comes back to power.
Right.
So they have very little reason to take on the criticism coming against a project which is their opponents. It's
That
much
is
easier
true.
to say that we are against this project. We always were. This is a failure of the previous government.
Right.
So suddenly you have a central government, Delhi state and UP government who are not supportive of Formula One. And I think as a businessman, Formula One must have sensed that, we require support.
Right.
And that's not going to come. In fact, suddenly we might become scapegoats
Yeah.
for the previous government. JP
Right.
does not have this option. JP's already spent millions and millions and millions of rupee in it. And so they have to see this through.
Right. So it was not just the taxes which were from
The issue over here.
issue over. It was politics. It was how the news was covered. It was the general ecosystem. It was the economy. Everything just played against what F1 was planning to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Is there any future of Formula One, or do you see any other avenue through which Formula One or car racing can enter the Indian business ecosystem?
So, unlike most other sports, and for a skeptic of Formula One, I'm still hopeful because of the kind of things which have happened in the last few months and what we have been following. One thing what we can certainly learn from F1 is the fact that you have to have the local connect. You have to ensure that middle class Indians, especially who have some kind of disposable income, are actually coming in and consuming the sport. Now, one beautiful thing which has happened is recently we had the Indian Racing Festival. And I think that is the future.
Can you say what is this racing festival?
So this is really interesting. And this is where, I get a little hopeful and excited.
So there are three different categories as far as the cars are concerned. To start off with the junior most formula, we have the Formula FLGB F4. Those are cars which are actually designed and made in India. The next category would be the Wolf cars, which are running in the Indian Racing League. So that's a city-based franchise system. And then we have the Formula 4. That's a stepping stone to the higher series. There are 16 cars in the Formula 4 category.
The Indian Racing Festival is collaboration between this private company, which is called Racing Promotions Private Limited, and the Sports Development Authority of Tamil Nadu. So it is by the government public-private partnership. They have two separate races. One is the F4 racing, like F1, F2, F3. This is the F4 racing, which has been recognized by the FIA, which is the international body. So that is one race. The other one is the Indian Racing League. So like we have discussed, it's the league, I think, which will save motor racing in India, right? And our podcast was mostly about the leagues this time, and this is where I think it's hopeful. So the Indian Racing League is really interesting because it has 6 teams from 6 different cities. You have teams like Bengal Tigers, Speed Demons Delhi, Hyderabad Blackbirds, Bangalore Speedsters, all of these.
So very similar to how in Kabaddi we found
very similar to
teams based
Kabaddi.
around regional identities.
Based around regional identity. You have your set of celebrity guests. Believe it or not, Saurav Ganguly owns some part of the Bengal team of racing.
Indian Racing Festival. Time to gear up India.
So you can expect him to, the end of the race, instead of the checkered flag, remove his shirt and twirl like that series. Arjun Kapoor from Bollywood. So you have the Bollywood input there. Arjun Kapoor is
Which
part
is now
of it.
mandatory of any
Mandatory. You have to have that.
The Indian Racing Festival. Time to gear up India.
Right? But more interestingly, they are pushing boundaries in a way where Indian Racing League is a gender-neutral league.
Wow.
So each team will have one Indian racer, one Indian international racer, which means an Indian ethnicity person from anywhere else, one international driver and one woman driver. So these 4 people form the team and they race around in separate
And I'm already
tracks.
thinking that you can make different ads for different audiences.
Oh yes, you can make so much of it. So one thing of the future being this collaboration. And recently Chennai had the first F4 race, and believe it or not, it was a street race and it was at night, right? F4 is more accessible, not just to the consumers in the ticket price or anything, but also for racing enthusiasts who want an opportunity to start. So there are people who are interested in funding racing, and I think the league format is something which we really need to look at, and hopefully that will pique the interest. So slowly, I think this slow process of not extensive private capital just being pushed and to make something of a spectacle, this slow, more localized, more drivers in collaboration with the local government, getting in more local people, and a slow growth towards F1, I think that's the future, what we can see. But that aside, Rahul, think about it. We started by talking about what makes F1 so exciting. So if you had to give me short rundown on the greatest moments of Formula One, what would it be?
Kailash, that's why we have such a great production team.
God! Michael Schumacher hits David Coulthard and is out of the Belgian Grand Prix.
And Mika, and the back markers in the way. Either side of Zonta, and Hakkinen brilliantly takes the lead of the Belgian Grand Prix.
Michael Schumacher takes an unprecedented 7th world title.
The circuit for me was a tunnel, which I was just going, and I realized I was well beyond my conscious understanding.
Hey, steering wheel, somebody tell him to give it to me.
What a brilliant move! Side by side down the straight, Grand Prix racing at its absolute finest. He started from 17th place.
Brilliant stuff from Raikkonen.
Kimi Raikkonen then.
Let me alone, I know what to do.
You're listening to
आप सुन रहे हैं
You're listening to
നിങ്ങൾ കേൾക്കുന്നത്
न्यू കേൾತಾ ഇದ್ದೀರಾ ರೇ ಕಥಾ ಸುನ್ ರೇಡಿಯೋ
Azim Premji
ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿ.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. This non-commercial program is for educational purposes only.